What's up, folks? Casual Dad here, and tonight we're going to do something completely different. This past Thursday, August 17th, was the 11-year anniversary of a game that's near and dear to my heart. That is the X-Wing Miniatures game. And while I'm sitting here having an existential crisis about where the past 11 years went, I'm going to go ahead and dig in real quick into list building in X-Wing, because there are a lot of questions about that. It's in a state where it's in a really, really healthy spot right now, but also can be a little confusing. So I'm going to do a super quick introduction, a very quick background that's kind of necessary to get into it, and then I'm going to dive right into list building with some extra resources on where to continue list building and then also kind of where to go from there. So what you see in front of you is X-Wing Miniatures. This is a still shot of the game. It's a fantastic tabletop miniatures game with a really, really cool mechanic that makes it feel like you're actually physically flying ships. Um, that's the core of it. You get to play with your really, really iconic ships. Here you can see X-Wings and TIE Interceptors. Those X-Wings, though, are T-70s. They're the Resistance X-Wings because Resistance is a faction in the game. And then just to talk through it real quick, there have been multiple versions of the game, and if you're getting into it, you kind of need to know at least a little bit about that just to kind of get past it. So the game was released by Fantasy Flight Games way, way back 11 years ago in what's now considered 1.0, the original version of the game. It was then re-released as 2.0, the second reboot version, still under FFG, and then recently they passed it off to a subsidiary studio, Atomic Mass Games, in the past couple of years, and that's done a pretty significant rules overhaul, but it's still the same base game, and so people consider that 2.5. So there's three editions: 1.0, 2.0, 2.5. 2.5 is what we're actually going to build in today. That's the current version of the game. It's the supported version of the game. It's the one that most people you run into are going to be playing, but you should just know that the other ones are out there. So real quick, talking about objectives, because that's important when you're list building. The way the game works is that you have two players. Well, the standard base game, rather, excuse me. There's also Epic for larger games, and there's also a couple side games like Droid Soccer, Aces High, and then some other ones too that you can look into if you want. But anyway, so the standard base game, you can play, or you play the game, and then the way you win is by getting to 20 points or having the most points at the end of time, when the standard game is 75 minutes. So either way, you're racking up points, and the way you get points is either destroying your opponent's ships and getting the points value of that ship, or by completing objectives. And there are four different objectives, or excuse me, four different missions. Each of them is slightly different. One of them is basically a dogfight, where you get most of your points by destroying enemy ships and not getting your ships destroyed. But there is still a center objective, so you can still get some points passively as well. So you do still want to keep that in mind. The other one, or the next one, is an action-based one, where there are multiple objectives across the board, and your ships have to spend a turn doing an action where they flip the objective to your team, or the opponent does it too. So you sacrifice some of your in-game actions to flip this and gain points that way. The third is area control. So you get points based on having more of your friendly ships or larger of your ships around an objective than your opponent. And then the final one is crates, where you spend an action to pick up a crate, and then that ship is considered to be carrying a piece of cargo that then makes it a little bit slower and less maneuverable. So there's some vulnerability involved, but that's how you earn points in that scenario. So those are the four missions to keep in mind when you're looking at list building. And I'm going to look at one of the main list builders over here. We're going to jump straight to it. This is called Yasby. This is the latest version. You can see that address in the address bar. It's yasby.app. Excuse me. This part right here. Easy to find, and this is the web-based builder that I'm going to use for the demo today. There's also the app that I use a lot on my phone that's an actual phone app that is LaunchBay Next. The developers of both are amazing. And if you need to keep track of the current points cost for your ships, those two do a really good job of tracking it, so you don't have to go track down the spreadsheets manually, but I'll cover that later. So jumping right into list building, we talked about the previous version, so just so you know, depending on who you're talking to, in 1.0, the original version of the game, you had 100 squad points. You could do your entire squad of, I believe, anywhere from 2 to 8 ships, but you had to stay within that 100 points limit. And then you could either pay points for more ships, or you could pay points for upgrades on them. It all came out of your 100-point pool. 2.0 was exactly the same, where it was a 200-point pool, but still you paid your ship points and you paid your upgrade points out of that same pot. So you could compromise more expensive upgrades and fewer ships, or cheaper upgrades and more ships, both of which give you different advantages or not. Now, the current version is slightly different. We're going to go ahead and jump into it. But the first thing is it is a 20-point system. So you have 20 points to spend, and those are your squad points. But in addition to your squad points, each ship also has a dedicated pool of loadout points. So those are points that are always associated with that ship or pilot, no matter what else is in your squad. So that's a cool thing to keep in mind. So you're going to see two numbers, and we'll talk about that in a minute. So first thing you do is pick one of your 7 factions up here. You've got, it is 7, right? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Yeah. You've got roughly 2 per era. You've got your 2 prequels in the Galactic Republic and the Separatist Alliance. Then you have your kind of modern, or, well, not modern. You've got your original trilogy factions in the Rebels and Empire. Then you have the Resistance and First Order for the sequel factions. And then, of course, you have Scum and Villainy, your pirates and bounty hunters that crosses throughout the middle. Now, I've been building with Rebels, so we're just going to start with that. You can name your squad right here. Super awesome squad. And you can save these. There is the option to log in up here, so you can actually save your squads and return to them if you want to. There's also an export option here, so you can share these squads. I often will just copy a link and send it to myself in Facebook Messenger so I can access it later. They also are very exportable, which is a really kind of great way to do it. So I'm going to jump right in. I've got Rebels. I've got 20 points to go, so we'll just grab a ship. And so the first thing you do is pick a ship. And this is your actual base chassis. This is the ship you're going to fly, so I'm going to use some ones that are going to be familiar. Got your T-65 X-Wing, the classic ship. Cool things here. So what you can see is I picked my ship, and then on the right, there's actually a summary bar that shows me what I've picked. So this shows you the base stats of that ship. You've got its attack power, you've got its evade or defensive power, how many hits it can take both as hull and shields. Shields are slightly more durable but more expensive. Hull, you'll usually get higher numbers, but it's vulnerable to critical damage. Won't go into that today. There also mentions a base size. There's small, medium, and large. Small ships tend to be faster and more maneuverable, arguably easier to fly. Medium ships are kind of in between, and then large ships are your biggest ships. They're more expensive, they're slower, they're a little bit cumbersome because you have to dodge around rocks, and that can be challenging. But they do tend to trade for that by having more powerful weapons, more upgrade slots, and then kind of just some more options. So there's a compromise, but at the moment, the sweet spot is your small base ships. Your large base ships are generally at kind of a disadvantage with some exceptions. So we picked our ship. The other thing too is you've got an action bar that tells you what actions the ship can take and how kind of flexible or adaptable it is. In general, there's just a single action symbol, but we'll look at some that have more. And then also you have your upgrade slots. Now I'm going to narrow this down a little bit because this tells me what possible upgrade slots the ship could have, but those can vary a little bit by pilot. So right here, we've got our Blue Squadron Escort. So I've got my ship, I've got my pilots. I'm going to go ahead and grab, oh, poor Biggs. Poor Biggs, we barely knew you. So I mentioned you've got your squad points. This is now 5 out of your 20, a full quarter for this one T-65 pilot. But then there's also the 18 here, which is the loadout points, which are points you can spend specifically on Biggs. So here you see this changed a little bit. There's the initiative that tells you what pilot skill this pilot is. Lower initiative skill will move first and fire last. So you have a double disadvantage for a lower pilot skill. Higher pilot skill will move second, so you know what is happening on the board before you move, and will move later, depending on your initiative. And then also will shoot earlier, so you have an advantage in both places. So it's an important thing to consider, but also your high initiative pilots tend to be more expensive. So just jumping into that. Same actions we already saw, but then these are your upgrades. And you'll get to know these symbols as you go on, but each symbol limits exactly what kind of upgrades this ship can have. So this has a torpedo, an astromech, a modification, and what's called a config, or like a title. In this case, that's this. Not going to go into that because there's a lot of rules in it. But then you can choose your individual upgrades per slot. I'm going to go ahead and go R2-D2 just for the theme. And he's got 18 points. He's got a lot to spend still. So we'll take a look at the torpedo. What can we do? And you can see these kind of ramp up real quick. So I already don't have the points for proton torpedoes, so it's grayed out for me, but I could normally take those. I will go ahead and take some good old plasma torpedoes, and then we still have 5 points to spend for modification, which is terrible because I don't think there are any 5-point modifications. So we'll just do a spare parts canister, just because. Now we have one ship. So let's fill this out a little bit. And then each time you click on one of these, you'll note that that summary on the right shows you what it is, which is really cool. And then as a bonus, if you do want to pick up these physical pieces, also in the bottom there under sources, it'll tell you which expansion boxes you can actually get this card in addition to trading or buying singles from eBay or something. So let's go ahead and pop through our squad. I'm not going to make a very good squad. We're just going to go ahead and do it. We've got a good old classic B-Wing, very familiar ship. I'm going to go ahead and grab Hera herself. Oh yeah, there we go. And look at those slots. My goodness. But what you'll notice about the B-Wing, so she's got really high initiative, which is a big advantage, same attack dice, but only one evade and not a whole lot more durability. So this is a high-risk ship that you need to do a bunch of damage, but look at that action bar too. All kinds of options here. And you can see that these have the red color as well. So some actions are actually more difficult for a pilot, and so they will end up what's called stressed if they do that. The arrow shows the linked action, so you can do two actions together but get stressed out if you do it. So there's that, and then we have this absolute pile of upgrade slots. We'll just throw some stuff together. You've got your pilot talent. Let's see, why not? We'll do Predator. We got a cannon upgrade. We'll go ahead and throw on the, just to freak people out, we'll do proton cannons. And then there's a title. We'll do that. And I wouldn't worry too much about what these upgrades are. You'll figure that out as you build with them. I just want to kind of show the mechanics of how this works. We'll do a fire control system. We'll then do a modification. What do we got here? We still have 5 points. Yeah, we're not doing that. Yeah, we'll do baffle. Why not? And then we got a 3-point gunner. Nope. We have 3-point bombs though. Yeah, seismic charges. There we go. Cool. Now we have 2. Let's go ahead and throw in the A-Wing. Some more iconic ships here and see what we end up building. And we're going to go ahead and pick Sabine in honor of the Ahsoka show that's about to come out next week, which I'm super excited about. Now, one thing I wanted to highlight is these ships have, I mentioned that one of the mechanics of the game is that you actually feel like you're physically flying these ships. So one thing to check out is the actual dial. So I've got Biggs, the X-Wing. These are all the maneuvers this ship can do, and blue ones are easy. They actually will benefit the ship for doing them. White is sort of normal, where you just do it. And then red is hard, where it will actually stress the ship to go ahead and do those. And then this also, pilots also have abilities you want to look at, and you can kind of see how those synergize with each other as you're building your squad. We got Hera over here, got her ability too, but look at that dial. So you'll notice right off the bat it is slower, doesn't have as many of the 3-speed maneuvers, which are faster, does have more of the 1-speed maneuvers, so it's a little more maneuverable at low speed, but a lot more of those maneuvers are red. So that's a ship that easily stresses itself out for moving and doesn't get away from things easily because it's fairly slow. Yeah, so that's a good thing to keep in mind. As compared to the A-Wing, which is one of the fastest ships in the game, it's got a whole movement bar the other two ships don't even have because it can go the 5-speed. Very quick, zippy little ship, can do a lot. So it's cool to have a balance. I mentioned the different types of missions. It's really helpful to either have a squad that's very focused on one thing and very, very good at it. Could be what they call a jousting squad, where it just flies straight at someone's face and just shoots them as hard as it can. Could be a very dodgy list that they call AC. But most lists you're going to run into have a bit of a mix. You've got a heavy hitter, you've got a couple durable ships, and 1 or 2 maybe quicker ships that can grab objectives or just generally be obnoxious and get out of tight spaces. So let's see, Sabine here, we'll go and throw on her clan training. We'll make her just a straight up Mandalorian because I love that she can do this now. Do we get the thing? Mandalorian optics, yeah, okay. Boom, 7 out of 7. So again, she's 3 squad points, 7 loadout just for her. Hera's 5, Biggs is 5. And they have their loadout points just for them. A couple things about that. The reason that oh geez, sorry, I got distracted. The reason that AMG decided to do that, the 20 is it's easy to score. They wanted to keep that low. There have been some complaints that that limits the granularity. They don't have as much control. But one of the things I really like about this is they now have the loadout value, so they can kind of give pilots more or less loadout based on how kind of powerful they should be, or to kind of offset the squad points. So you can have a ship that's more expensive but has a ton of squad points, or a ship that's cheaper but has very few, as seen between Biggs and then Sabine. Sabine's 2 points cheaper as a ship, but she gets less than half as many upgrade points and fewer slots. So it's just kind of a thing to keep in mind. But yeah, so we're looking at 3 ships. I've got 13 points spent out of 20. So I'm going to try to get the last 7. Let's see what I can throw in here. I believe I can do Ezra and the Gauntlet, but we'll throw in a Falcon. Oh, look at that, perfect 7. Let's see, who can I fit for 7? I can do Han for 7. Oh, scary. Okay. So there's Han Solo. You've got this here, and that dial's actually pretty good. He's pretty fast. It's very, very similar to the X-Wing with some fewer blues. But one thing to keep in mind again is this is a large base. So it says the base size here. So we've got 3 small, 1 large. And that does mean that being fast is actually kind of a liability because it makes it a lot harder to predict where you're going to end up, and you could hit a rock by accident much more easily, or bump into another ship and end up with the issues from that. So I just filled to exactly 20 points. It is possible to go less than 20. Most factions have a 2-point ship, so 18 is very, very rare. But it is entirely possible to end up with 19 out of 20. And if you have a list with 19 out of your 20 total squad points, you can run that totally fine. But the second you start a game, your opponent will automatically start with 1 point because of the point that you have given up or forfeited for doing that. So you can do it if you really want. It's not going to come up too often. So we'll go ahead and do the classic boogeyman. Let's see, I don't even know what title he usually has. I know this one though. This is gonna make people a little bit twitchy. This is the current standard boogeyman Han Solo. Where are you, buddy? Way down. God, look at all those crew options. And then we have chopper and engine upgrade. Anyway, there we go. We have now built a 20-point squad where you can see all the pieces, you can see where all this comes from, and that is how you list build in X-Wing 2.5. So there it is, super quick. If you want to find the additional resources, you can see that all of these different upgrades have various point costs, and these ships have different slots available for the upgrades that they can put in here. Every 6 months or so, AMG does rebalance the game based on new content, tournament performance, if anything is kind of cropped up too much. They will tweak and trim and adjust. These builders usually are up to date. They do a really, really good job, and the developers do have, I believe, donate buttons in here somewhere. There should be a support me, but anyway, so look for that if you can, because these devs put in a ton of work and it's super helpful to the community to have tools like this that you can just use to maintain the game. If you do want to do this all by hand, you have the cards, you don't want to use this stuff, there is the atomicmassgames.com/xwing documents. That'll give you the rulebook. It'll also give you the errata, some cards that have been tweaked a bit since they were printed, and then it's got your points, both for upgrade points and then your ships. It'll show you the current and then the last version just so you can compare the two if you really want to. Then they've got your missions here, and then they've got the ban list. That's a thing I need to mention too, is that some upgrades you actually won't see in these options because it is banned. Also, I should highlight that there are a couple different official versions of the game, even within 2.5. That is, the ships that are current are the ones, or standard, are the ones that have been re-released since the game switched from 1.0 to 2.0, and that's now your standard format. You can also go to extended, which will be any ship ever released all the way through 1.0, which is a fun way to play with some additional options. Most factions don't lose a ton between the two, especially your newer factions. The Separatist and Republic didn't even exist before 2.0, so all of their stuff is standard. But everybody else lost a couple ships, and Scum lost quite a few between standard that we're all kind of hoping we get at least most of them back. But so that is something to be aware of to see, like, why are these upgrades showing or not? Why are these pilots available or not? So you do kind of want to check that and check your list before you play. Next up, this is how you build a list by hand. And if you really love that kind of tinkering element of putting things together and seeing how they work and playing around with it, you would probably love building your own lists. I personally really enjoy this. It's also a really handy skill to have if you have a limited collection and have to build with what you have. It's great. But there is also the option of what's called net listing, which is going on, looking at some local tournaments, seeing what people have flown, picking what you want to fly, and just flying that. One of the best resources for that is going to be List Fortress. This will show recent tournaments. Then you can just click on a tournament, and then you'll actually see the list that other people have run, including its performance and how it went in the tournament. So this was the #1 list on that, which looks interesting. Okay, I got Wedge in there. I like that. Nice. But yeah, you can just look for lists in your chosen faction, and there are your faction tags there. And this is an easy way to kind of look at things and choose what you want to fly without spending the time of tinkering around and building your own thing. If you're just getting into the game, net listing is a particularly good way to get started with something that's not going to totally embarrass you before you get a handle of and want to start building your own lists. Or you can jump in either way. Totally up to you. A couple other pieces I did want to go ahead and highlight. And all of those links will be in the notes for this episode. One other thing, too, is that you can play in person on the tabletop. If you do, I do personally really, really recommend a playmat. And if you're getting into this for the first time, I should have had this pulled up. We'll go ahead and do this. There are brand new starter sets for both the Empire and the Rebel Alliance. There are 4 ship boxes that include all of the dice, templates, tokens you'll need. They actually have a rulebook in there, and they have several of what are called standardized loadout cards. They're just extra large cards that have the upgrades on them. Let's see if this comes up. Shame. This kind of does, though. So this is a single card that has the ship, the abilities on it, the ability of it, and then this has upgrades on it. So this is a single card. You throw your ship on the table, you pull out this card, you can play right away. So there are several. Oh, there we go. There are several of these. Yeah, there it is. In the starter set and some others that will let you play quickly, where you just jump right in and you can play with a ship without having to pick out the upgrades or choose the individual cards. This is something Atomic Mass Games has been doing recently to make these a little bit more player friendly. And even me as a veteran player, I really appreciate these because they often have upgrade combinations you can't do in the custom version. Usually because they're just more upgrade points than the ship normally has, because they want to give you those options, but without letting you cheese it. So it's easier to balance, but still plays the way you want the pilot to in a very thematic way that's easier to balance. And I kind of appreciate they're doing that. But also just for sheer convenience, being able to do this thing without having a bunch of cards to carry around is cool. So I appreciate they're doing that. And then the other thing I do want to make sure to mention is that in addition to playing on the tabletop, you can also play in, there's a program called Vassal that's free but very difficult to use. Or there's the Tabletop Simulator on Steam, if your computer can run it, has a really spectacular community maintained X-Wing 2.0, 2.5 mod that plays basically like the tabletop game. And it's actually how the game really stayed alive and how the community kept playing during the whole COVID shutdown. So a couple options there. I'll have links to all of that in the description. Hope this was helpful. And quick shout out here. I did borrow this picture, but I want to make sure to shout out the playersaid.com blog from 2017. It gave me this great banner photo I opened with. So there we go. I appreciate it. Until next time.